Cloud. So good morning, good afternoon, whatever time zone you are. Welcome to the beginner free online handstand workshop. It's, as I always say, this is my perspective on the skill, and it's a way to hopefully demystify this idea of, a lot of people approach the handstand, they see someone do it, they think, oh, that's hard, I could never do it, I'm not that coordinated. It's a skill like anything else. So there is a physicality to it, there's a technique, there's a psychology, and you have to build up to it. And what I want to do is just kind of demystify, give you a plan, a protocol, concepts to follow, so that if you see someone do a handstand and you think, oh, I could never do that, you understand, okay, there's a process. These are the steps that I can take to be able to do that. And it's not overly complex. And what I'm going to try to do is offer a few different perspectives. A lot of the content that you'll see if you search some YouTube tutorials kind of comes from basic gymnastics, which is generally a good protocol to follow, but also you have to understand that as an adult just looking to learn a handstand for fun, you may not have to follow all of the same progressions as a competitive gymnast. Some of them are useful and some of them may not be useful because they're very specific to the sport. So I don't want to talk too much as an intro. So we're just going to get in there. We're going to start with a bit of warm-up. Main warm-up that I think is the most important for handstand are the wrists and shoulders. The wrists are what contacts the ground and controls your balance, so that's really important. And the shoulders are going to be what sets your shape and what holds you up in your handstand. So you can stand up if you want. And I guess one thing I forgot, so that no equipment is required. What I did bring is just a cushion because we're probably going to do a few headstands to help with inversion. You don't need it. It just makes it a little bit more comfortable if you're on a hard floor, because currently I'm on a hardwood floor. So all you really need for a handstand practice, because I want to keep it simple in terms of equipment, is a bit of floor space that's open, where there's no obstacles or anything like that. If you have that in your house, great. If not, you can go to the gym and find that. You can have that outside. And then a wall is going to be very useful for learning the handstand progressions, so you should definitely have a wall available. You don't absolutely need a wall to learn the handstand, but it's going to be very helpful. I personally, in my own process, I never used a wall. I just kind of kicked up and fell over and over and over and over again. And then eventually I figured out how to hold it. But I could have done that a lot safer and a lot more quickly if I did have a wall. So we're going to do a bit of shoulder warm up. First thing is just big reach. You're going to reach up as tall as possible, and you're going to hold it for a few seconds. And then relax. So we're going to do a few of those. Just big reach, as tall as you can. Focus on extending the arms upward and relax. And this is part of the warm-up. We're also kind of assessing what kind of shoulder flexibility we have, because there's no right or wrong way to do the handstand, but if you can make a line between your back and your arms, it's generally more mechanically efficient and more aesthetically pleasing. So we're just going to reach and then drop and relax in between. And we'll do about 5 or 10 of those. Reach as tall as possible, relax. And see, again, if you're stiff, maybe your reach is a little bit here, that's okay. Just try to get taller and taller each time. Big reach, relax. One more time. Reach, relax. And then we're going to leave the arms, this time just focus on the shoulders. So we're going to shrug, try to crush your neck and your head with your traps, and then drop. Shrug, and then drop. So these movements are going to be important because the shoulders are what create the structure to hold yourself up. You don't need to be strong to do a handstand. There is a minimal amount of strength, but if you use good technique, you really don't have to use a ton of physical exertion, but it also depends on how comfortable you are. Because if it's a new skill, you're not comfortable yet, you might tense up more than you need to. But shoulders are the most important, because the shoulders, how you push into the floor with that is what creates the structure of your handstand. So very important to understand how to push and how to relax as well, because you want to have a balance. you don't want to be walking around like this, but in the handstand, you want to understand generally this is what you're going to be trying to do for a while. And that's kind of the repetitive cue that you're probably going to have to tell yourself. Or if you have a coach, that's what the coach is going to tell you. More push, because it's the easiest thing to lose. And it's the one thing that really does create the structure to hold yourself up. So we're going to do a little bit more reaching. We're going to do now one arm. So one arm goes up and then the other arm goes down. So this way I can actually reach a little bit taller. So from here to here, I can actually get a bigger reach. And again, this is just to understand kind of maximal extension. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be in maximal extension when you do your handstand, but it's good to know it. And again, I talk about this when I teach, is this idea of manifestation versus intention. Is you might be trying to do something, and what actually comes out in the movement might not look like what you think it is, but what you're trying to do is also really important. So it's like, again, this idea, you may not be fully 100% shrugged in your handstand, but if your intent is to push, then that's more important than how far you're actually pushing. Again, to a degree, it depends a lot on the person, depends on the skill. So we're going to do a couple more shoulder movements. This is a good one just kind of for general. So we're going to have the arms. We're going to change the camera angle a little bit. So we have the arms and up. And what we're going to do is keep them behind you as far as you can. You're going to go to horizontal, rotate, and then touch. So the movement looks like this. So at any given point, I'm trying to have my arms behind me as far as possible, and I'm going through this nice rotation in the shoulders. This is not just for handstand. I mean, it's a good handstand warm-up, but it's actually a really good shoulder exercise in general. Just like that. We'll do about, I'm not really counting, maybe 5 to 10 of those. And at this point, arms probably feel a little bit more warm. I know that's the case for me. I'm going to do one more of these. And then we're going to do one more thing. It's not so much handstand warm-up, but it's a cue that we're going to use. So we're going to think about sternum, and we're going to pull it in like this. I'm going to expand the chest and here. And again, the thought is just sternum, forwards and backwards. Depending on how picky we get with the technique, this is a cue that's going to make your line straighter. Again, there's nothing wrong with having a bit of arch in the back, and it's more comfortable for a lot of people, but depending on your standards, this cue. This is the hollow chest cue. And the reason I'm focusing specifically on this cue is because it's the hardest one to feel when you're upside down. We'll get into the posterior pelvic tilt a little bit later as well, but for now, just understand how to, and you can try that with your arms vertical as well. So it's not a shoulder movement, it's upper back. So closing the chest and opening the chest. And again, if you are going for that super straight line aesthetic and you're going for that kind of gymnastics standard, this is a good cue to understand, because that hollow position is not so much necessarily for the hand balancing itself, but if you are going into gymnastics progressions, gymnastics protocols, a lot of the gymnastics skills, and if you go to a gymnastics gym, you'll see a lot of hollow body work, because this is very important for a lot of those modern gymnastic skills. The hollow body will transfer from arch to hollow, but again, that's a completely different workshop, and I need to stay a little bit more on topic. So next thing we're going to do is just a little bit of wrist. Wrists are also very important. Number one, because if you're an adult who's just kind of starting the handstand training, your wrists are probably not conditioned to being able to take the weight. So you have to build up that conditioning, and that is just a physical adaptation that you have to create. Doing handstands is going to help create that adaptation, of course, but it's good to do a little bit of extra warm up again, especially if you're not a little kid, and if you're new to putting weight on your hands. So first thing we're gonna do is just open and close the hands, just to get a little bit of blood flow. You can do it with straight arms, you can do it with different arm positions. So it's like if you really want to and you're short on time, you can combine this shoulder and wrist workout. But this is just to get some blood to the hands. This isn't overly technical or anything like that. We'll get into some of that a little bit later. But for now, it's just blood flow. Blood flow. And then what we're going to do is clasp the fingers together and just roll around. You can roll fast. You can add a bit of tension. Oh, I'm getting some, I don't know if the microphone's picking that up, but I'm getting some pops and some clicks, which is, again, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's all the more reason to do a thorough wrist warm up. And I'm not going to go crazy on the wrist warm up today, but just keep it in mind. I do recommend, especially again, if you're an adult, you're new to the practice, do a good wrist warm up every time you train, at least for the first year or two of your practice, because then hopefully by then you've built enough confidence and understanding and physical adaptation to not necessarily have to do a super heavy wrist warm up if you know you don't need it. But again, this is what actually contacts the floor, and this particular joint, it's very small. There's a lot of bones and nerves and tendons, and it's not a particularly strong joint, so you do want to make sure you take care of it. So the next exercise, we're going to keep the fingers clasped, and we're going to do the wave. So try to really articulate the wrist and the finger joint. Yep. And then another movement we're going to do, this is what I call the handcuff. So imagine that your wrists are locked together, and what you're going to do is circle. You're going to draw circles, but you're going to keep that contact. So here you're going into wrist extension and radial ulnar deviation, flexion, just to get some good blood flow to the wrists and the hands. Very, very important. And I know for myself, so I'll say this, I've had a lot of wrist injuries, but I've never actually had any wrist injuries from hand balancing. Other than, yeah, you're gonna have soreness from high volume training, but I've never injured my wrist from doing handstands. The wrist injuries that I've had have been from some kind of trauma, whether it was from tumbling or martial arts or things like that. But if you take care of your wrists, hand balancing should not be too stressful on them. And even if you don't have good wrist flexibility, there are options. You can modify the practice, like using parallels, for example, which I probably won't get into today. So one more wrist exercise, and then we'll get into some more technical stuff. So we're gonna go into the prayer position. And what I'm gonna do is try to, basically I'm lifting my elbows up, and as I do that, I'm stretching my wrist this way. So it's like that. And I can do a little bit of rotation here to hit different angles. And then what I'm going to do, this is a test of your finger flexibility in relation to your wrist, is I'm going to extend, I'm going to keep the fingers together, but extend from the wrist joint. And the goal is if you can get 90 degrees or close, that's pretty good. A lot of people can't, not a problem. But, and then I can do, again, that same rotation, because when I rotate like this, I can get different angles. And then one more wrist thing. This is just simple. I'm just going to take the fingers and just bend them back and extend the elbow at the same time. I can hold, or I can do kind of these elbow pulses. I do a couple of those on each hand. As always, because nobody's symmetrical, so you're going to have differences from side to side. Just keep it in mind, if one side feels different than the other, it's not a bad thing. There's a point at which it may cause an imbalance in your handstand. It might not. This is all natural. Just make note of it. And make note of it from day to day. So today, okay, my left hand feels stiffer than my right. Why is that? What can I do to correct that? One more wrist exercise, so flexion. I'm gonna pull the wrist towards me, and again, extend the elbow. And I can do rotation. I can play with it. This is just kind of the way that I warm up. I don't typically hold the position. I think of warm up as an exploration. So if the concept is wrist flexion, I'm going to explore different angles. Partly because I'm not good at sitting still, but also I know in my own personal kind of physical journey, I was very averse to the militaristic gym class style workouts. Nothing wrong with that, but like this idea, right? This is what we did in gym class. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, switch. 1, 2, 3. Again, nothing wrong with that. It's just that as an individual, you're not the same as everybody else. So yeah, it's good to do something as a group, and there's still benefit to that. But I like to think of exploration. Very, very important. So we're going to do a little bit of shoulder flexibility. I'm going to do a couple things with the wall before I move the camera angle low. So first thing we're going to do is just basic shoulder stretch on the wall, basic shoulder flexion. So we're going to have the arms up. You're going to drop your weight. And what I'm trying to do, I know I don't have the sideways angle here. If I had a separate camera, that would be great. And then I could switch angles back and forth. So I'm trying to touch the sternum to the wall. And as I do so, it's opening up my shoulders this way. And I can play with how far I bend my knees, right? I can play with the distance to the wall. Let me see if I can get a better angle with that. So that's a little bit better. So like this. And what I can do, I hope that's visible, I can also rotate. So when I rotate, I can get a little bit more into the lats. But this is just, I can pulse a little bit, again, exploring this range, this end range of shoulder flexion, because that shoulder flexion is going to be very important for the handstand. So this, what we're going to do, we're going to do a couple rounds. We're going to combine that with some active shoulder flexion. And this is the drill that's a very good assessment of your handstand line and your shoulder flexibility, but also very good as a corrective measure as well. So I'm just going to stand next to the wall. My feet are a little bit in front of the wall, so maybe about a foot. My feet are not touching. What I'm going to do is flatten my back. So if I naturally stand, there's a curve in my back. We all have curves in our backs. The human body is not straight. What I'm going to do is get my head to the wall and then flatten my back to the wall so there's no space. I'm going to take my arms and I'm going to lift my arms overhead while maintaining that flat back. And what I'm going to try to avoid is the arms going wide. I'm going to try to avoid the elbows bending. And I'm going to try to avoid losing the low back. So it's flattening and then lifting and holding. And this is not easy, right? So for me, I feel my upper back light up. And interesting enough, this is just for my personal practice today, I feel it more in my right rhomboid than anywhere else. So then it's like, okay, what did I do yesterday? How is my handstand going to look if my right shoulder is a little bit stiff from an active flexibility sense? Just something to be aware of, because ultimately we're all different. So you have to know your own body and you have to know your limitations. And you have to know the little tweaks that you're going to have to make for your practice to be as effective as you want it to be. And we can superset that. So we can do a couple rounds, right? Kind of more of that. I don't want to call it passive. I don't think it's a good word for this kind of stretch because I'm still doing stuff, but I'm using gravity to help pull my shoulders more open, whereas here I'm going against the grain. But yeah, we can do a couple rounds like that. And then one other thing that I want to do against the wall before we go onto the floor, hopefully I can get the angle, is if you have like a thin drywall, I don't recommend. Make sure that your wall is solid before you try this one. I'm going to do a horizontal handstand basically. So what I'm going to try to do is put my arms over my head and push against this wall. And I'm trying to knock this wall down. I'm trying to push. So it's kind of, you can make it a flexibility exercise, or you can make it more of a strength shoulder activation exercise like this. So I'm trying to see if I'm in frame like this. Am I in frame? Yeah. So I'm trying to push into the wall. Push. I can change the angle a little bit, right? That's fun too. And again, this is just like a fun kind of strength activation exercise, but between those three, you can start to get a feel for the activation and the muscular engagement that you're going to need to hold yourself up in your handstand, right? So quick recap. We have flexibility, we have the active, and then we have push, knock the wall down. But don't try, again, don't try to knock your wall down if you can put a hole in the wall. So you have to show discretion, as always. But from there, upper body should feel warm. So then we're going to go to the floor, and we're going to start doing a little bit more arm support work. Change the angle. Yeah, I need a camera operator. Doing my best. Okay, so we did a little bit of wrist warm up. We're going to do some wrist warm up now. Just kneeling, just put weight in the hands. So it's one thing doing it like this. It's another thing doing it in that 90-degree angle. So all I'm doing is slowly shifting more weight into my hands. See how the wrists feel. See if there's a difference from side to side. Keep my elbows straight. I can play around with some different angles. I can push and release. So instead of keeping my hand completely relaxed, I can also push into the fingers, into wrist flexion. That's going to be very important for not going too far into the wrist, but also later on for maintaining balance, because we're not going to go into that in this workshop, but the balance comes from flexion, extension of the hand mainly. So, but this is just gradual loading. Gradual loading, and then what I can do is change the angle of the fingers, turn the fingers out, shift back and forth, turn the fingers in, shift back and forth. Again, I don't like to sit still, but I'm always exploring which angle is better, which angle do I feel some interesting stuff. I can turn the wrists out, so the fingers are facing towards the knees. And again, just exploring range, the wrist flexibility. And then if you're on a hard floor, go slow with this one. You can also do the same thing on the back of the hand. This is a lot more comfortable if you have a matted floor, although when it comes to the actual balance of the handstand, I do recommend a hard floor. I'll go into why maybe later, but the idea is that it gives you more feedback. A matted floor is nice to land and to fall on, but it dampens the sensations and the feedback that you might receive, which it's not as good for learning the technique because you want that feedback. So now the wrists are warm. We're going to do just some basic arm support work, a little bit of shoulder conditioning. So first thing, simple, just push-up position, right? What we want here is not this, but maximal push. The maximal push, it's not something that you need 100%, but as a concept, it's very important to understand. So push-up position, what I like to do with my push-up position is actually go on top of the feet like this. So that way, it kind of forces me to shift more weight into my hands, which is what I want. So here, I'm just going to hold. I'm going to try to straighten the elbows. I'm going to try to maximally push the floor away. What's very important here And this is when I used to coach kids, push-ups were one of the hardest things to teach because they're so easy to cheat. And a typical cheat is either this or this. But what happens, if you can see that, is my shoulders are no longer taking all of my weight. So the idea is to put more weight into the hands. And again, just get used to that. See what it feels like on the wrists. See the push. And then you can shake it out for a moment. And I think to really understand a concept, you have to understand opposite extremes. So you have to understand both creation and destruction. So what we're going to do next is maximally push from the shoulders. You're going to sink, let yourself just sink down and collapse, and then push back up. So it's kind of a strength exercise, but for me, it's more of a shaping positioning exercise. And again, it's this idea, you're going to want to think about this in your handstand, but gravity is pulling you this way. So you catch yourself, not only build the strength to push back up, but also understand this corrective motion of pushing the floor away against gravity. Create the space, understanding. In the handstand, it's going to be the same thing, but vertical, but it's a lot easier to coordinate that before you get inverted. If you want to add a little bit of challenge, you can try on one arm. So I shift to one arm, so my body did not twist. My body is still horizontal. I can try to do that same push, release, push. Not necessary to have to do it on one arm, but it's a way to add challenge, and it's a way to add more understanding with how to push the floor away. So you don't have to be able to do a certain number of push-ups, for example. Like this is kind of the basic upper body strength. If you can hold your arms overhead, you can hold a push-up position, you can hold yourself up in a handstand. Is it better to be stronger? Yes, absolutely. But a lot of people use this idea of the lack of physical attribute as an excuse, like, oh, I'm not strong enough. Getting stronger may help you with the handstand, it absolutely may. But the technique that I try to teach is one that's not dependent on strength, except for kind of, again, a base strength that you have to hold yourself up, but that's not a very high level of strength. So for example, just using this example, I can do squats, right? But in order to walk and stand, I don't have to be able to do a squat. Is it good that I can do squats? Yes, absolutely. But is it necessary for walking? So same idea. So like push-ups, if you want to add push-ups in your warm-up, you can, but you don't have to do any amount of push-ups to be able to hold a handstand. But it's good if you can at least do a few. And I'll just briefly discuss push-ups so that for all of the gymnastics and bodyweight progressions, and again, I taught kids for a while, so when I'm teaching kids that are beginners, that I want to get them to a high level, I want to think of the path and the journey, and I want to group the right movement patterns. So one thing I was very strict about when I taught kids is the elbows in push-up, like this. This is very typical, and what happens when I do like this is it actually pushes the weight back to my feet. But when I do the elbows in, my shoulders go a little bit forward. It's a better range of motion. I have a much more stable support in a bent arm position when I have that external rotation. But also that's going to lead into more advanced push-up progressions, like handstand push-ups, planche push-ups, things like that. So I'm not going to get too deep into push-ups, but if you are training push-ups and you're interested in these kind of progressions, I do recommend learning to do your push-up like this and trying to make the hands as heavy as possible. So relax, shake your hands out. That's just a little bit of arm support. Hopefully it, again, answers a few questions. You don't have to be that strong for handstand, but you have to know how to push. And for structure, imagine it like this. If I'm holding here, I can hold like this for a long time. But if you were to put weight on top of my back, it would sink further, right? But here, if you were to put weight on top of my back, I could still hold that weight and it's not collapsing my structure. So that's kind of the idea with this kind of shape that we're trying to build. One other arm support exercise that I like to do before we get into a little bit of inversion is the frog stand. So the frog stand is a good basic arm support exercise. It looks like this. The reason it's good is because it's very low center of gravity. So even if you do fall, you don't have very high to fall from. But also for a lot of beginner students, it's a way that you can feel how to have 100% of the weight on the hands, but still, again, in a very safe environment. There's no risk of falling on your back. You could fall on your face, but you'd have to try pretty hard to do that. And even if you do, your face is only a foot from the floor. So it's not scary. But the cues that I'll use for the frog stand, same thing with the shoulders. So we don't want this, we want protracted and depressed, so down and forward. You don't have to have this round back, but you want to think of it. Because here, I'm not really supported. So when I get here, I have the elbows slightly bent, I have the knees on top of my elbows, I round, and then I lean forward slowly with control until my feet get light. When my feet get light enough, I can do these little taps, or I can just lift. I want to breathe. I want to feel solid in the position. And again, if you don't feel ready to take your feet off, then don't. But make your hands as heavy as possible. Get as close as possible. Make sure you show control. That's the most important thing. And just one kind of technical cue, the way that I teach this is elbow bent, maybe about 120 degrees. And then this tricep tendon, I try to fit that on the ridge between my VMO and my kneecap. And I create this kind of table, this shelf. So when I do a frog stand like this, I don't actually have to hold my own legs up because they're resting on my elbows. If I had my legs like this, for example, which is a very popular way to practice the frog stand, the legs are sliding down. So it takes more effort to hold them up. And in terms of technique, we want minimal effort. In terms of strength, we want closer to maximal effort. In terms of technique, we want ease of use, ease of practice. So make technique easy, make strength difficult. And actually, we're going to do one more arm support exercise because this is going to be a little bit closer to what you're going to be in the handstand. So it's essentially a press handstand progression, but we're not working press handstands yet. But building that strength and that push is going to be very helpful. So you're going to have your butt up in the air as high as possible. And right now I'm about 50-50, hands and feet. So what I'm going to do is lean the weight into the hands and see what happens when I lean. I come up on tops of the toes because my feet are getting lighter, and I hold. And then I come back. And as I lean the weight into the hands, I try to do this, try to push. Because gravity is making me want to do this. But if I do that, I lose my structure. So I lean the weight into the hands, and I push into the floor. And I hold for a few seconds, and then I release. And if you want to get a little bit more fancy, you can try shrugs. Make the hands as heavy as possible, but not necessary. Even just this idea of, and again, eventually this is something you would use to learn a press handstand where you would lean so much that your feet completely lift off. But right now, even if you're at 75% on your hands, that's fine. Because you're building the strength and you're getting closer to being in a handstand. And the gaze for this one is I'm not looking like this, I'm looking at the floor between my hands. When we talk about inversion, safety, and control, which we'll do in a couple minutes, you do want to generally see the floor. It's not right or wrong, but seeing the floor, it gives you a better point of reference for where your body is. And more importantly, if you have to bail out, it's much easier to bail out when you can see the floor and you know where you're landing. So that's actually Very important concept as well. One other variation of this, if you want to do, this is just a kind of a fun conditioning exercise, is the bear walks. So I can walk. So again, I make my hands as heavy as possible, and I just walk from one hand to the other. And when I shift, I don't want to collapse. I want to keep the push. And this is just a really good shift from the side, just a really good strength builder. If you want to walk on all fours like that, again, also really good. And then if you wanted to make that more specific to building handstand strength and handstand conditioning, you would just, I don't have a lot of space to show this, but I would shift more weight into my hands. So try to make my hands as heavy as possible as I do these bear walks. And that's also, again, even if you don't want to do handstands, that's a really great just conditioning exercise, little animal movement crawl. But if you are looking to get better at handstands, this is also very helpful to get a better understanding of that shoulder push and how to build both the strength and the structure. So this is arm support. Again, when I was teaching in person, I might take a lot more time to explain all of this. So I'm going a lot faster than I normally would, but it's okay. But this is just, again, give you exercises, give you concepts to apply so you can start improving, you can start understanding. So I wrote some stuff down on a piece of paper. Next thing we're going to do is inversion. So this is another part of the handstand. We talked about the strength and the physical adaptation, but being upside down can be uncomfortable. It can be weird. It can be awkward. So you have to get used to being there, and you have to get comfortable with what it feels like to be upside down and to know where your body is. And if it's new to you, that might evoke some fear responses. You might get scared. And when you get scared, what happens? You might freeze. Right? You might try to use strength and push out of it and use muscle. You might collapse when you're scared. These are all potential fear responses. So how do you get over the fear? You have to build comfort. So we're going to do some headstands for a minute. I typically don't use headstand as a progression directly for the handstand. But what it is helpful for with beginners is just to get used to being upside down, just to get used to being in a position where your legs are above your head and you just spend enough time there that, okay, I know where my legs are, I know where the floor is, I'm comfortable here. So this is why I brought a cushion. Again, it's not necessary, but it's not that you can't practice headstands on a hard floor. It's that if it's uncomfortable on your head, it's going to be hard to focus on the other technical aspects. So you can use a mat or a cushion or a pillow or whatever. We're going to put the head on the floor, and this is really important. We're not going to bail out of the headstand. You shouldn't have to, because it should be completely controlled. The main thing that's going to cause people in the headstand to potentially fall over on their backs is this. So what you want to always make sure that you're doing is hands are in front of the head. You should be able to see the hands. And then typically the weight is going to be, let's call it 50-50 for today. So 50% on the hands, 50% on the head. This way it's 100% safe. If you move with control and you know where you are, there should be zero risk of falling in this particular position. So I'm going to put the head down. I'm going to lift my butt up. See where my hands are? Way in front of me, big triangle. And what I'm going to do, this is the easier way, right, is lifting with bent legs. If I'm more flexible, I can lift with straight legs. And notice, I don't know how visible that is on camera, because I'm not sure the frame. In the headstand, you're actually not going to be fully vertical. You're actually going to be, and this is, again, another safety measure for the headstand. There's a bit of tilt. The body is going to be slightly tilted towards the hands. And again, this is a position, if you can do it, you probably don't have to spend much more time on it. If it's new to you, if you're completely new to being upside down, it is probably worth learning, because you just have a solid base. You have a big base of support, so it's not difficult to find balance. You extend and just get used to holding, get used to being there, get used to breathing.
A good test of breathing is how well you can talk, right? So if you can talk, you can probably breathe, because talking is just a more complex form of breathing. And you come down always with control before you get tired, before you fail. Control is number one. If you want to make the headstand a bit more challenging, you'll see the triangle variation, right, with the hands next to the head. It's the same thing. It's a little bit more difficult because you have a much smaller base of support, right? So you could do headstand like this. Same concept. See, I'm not fully extended vertically. When I extend my legs, that might not have been in frame. When I extend my legs, they're not like this, a little bit like this, because if I did lose control, that means I could fall back onto my feet. Because in this case, you don't want to bail out of the headstand because there's not really any way to turn. There is, but it's awkward. So this is a drill that you want to do completely slow, no fast movements, no jerky movements, with 100% of control. So practice, again, if you can already do it, then it's probably no longer going to help you as a handstand progression. If you can't do it yet, it's going to help you get used to being upside down, which is very helpful, because the more comfortable you can be upside down, the less likely you're going to freak out, the less likely your body is going to collapse on itself if you have a moment where there's a loss of control. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do handstand kick-ups. And this it may seem like, whoa, we just jumped a number of progressions. We did, and it's for a very specific reason. It's because there is a fear, there is a psychology involved in the skill. And I'm trying to think of the best way to say this, you have to jump in the water, right? You have to jump in the water, because if you're doing all this dry land swimming, you still haven't experienced what it's like to be wet. So you might have the best shoulder stroke of anyone in your class, but if you haven't been in the water yet, you don't know how you're going to react. So I do the handstand kick up early because it teaches a lot of concepts of momentum and control within momentum and arm support, but it takes the skill off the pedestal, because you start to get used to the chaos. What if I do fall? Well, we're not going to fall, but we're going to learn how to. So very simple, very simple. Again, control is the name of the game. You don't want to make any wild movements. So this is how I'm going to teach the kick up for this particular progression. I'm going to stand. I'm going to put the hands on the floor. I'm going to shift the weight into the hands as I lift the legs, and then come back. It's not a kick up yet, but we want to start learning our flexibility and proportions, where we like to put the hands. So this is very slow. I balance, I lean the weight forward, put my hands on the floor, I shift the weight into the hands as I lift my legs up, and I come back with control, and I stand all the way up. I'm going to alternate legs, and I'm going to do a couple of these. So down. Notice my pace. Shift the weight, hold for a couple of seconds, come back. I'm going slow. You ever heard this phrase? I think they use it in the military. I've heard it in parkour classes I've taken. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Because what happens, a lot of people learning kick-ups, they think, I'm going from here to a handstand. And they try to jump, and there's no control, and they often put an impact into their hands and shoulders. So what this drill is teaching you to do is it's teaching you how to stand up and go through the motions, but it's also teaching you distance. Because when I kick into a handstand, my flexibility and proportions are going to determine where I like to put my hands in relation to my feet. When I do that slow, I know exactly where I need to be. And then it's a little bit of a strength builder as well, because we're still getting those moments, and it's teaching you to stand up. Because here's another mistake I see a lot, is this, right? Landing in a way that doesn't allow somebody to stand up, and you want to have that smooth transfer from hands to feet. So if my foot is on the ground the whole time, I have to figure out how much to bend my knee, what flexibility I have, how to stand up at it. Whoa. Whoa. And now we're going to add a little bit more chaos, a little bit of momentum. So same thing. I'm going slow. I reach, straight arms. Now when I have the weight in my hands, I'm going to switch the legs. Whoa. And then I'm going to stand up. Still control. Notice how high my legs went. Not very high. Not very high. Because if someone's a beginner, they don't know how to fall yet. This is just dipping the toes in the water. Getting wet, but we're not in the deep end yet. Because I don't know if you can swim yet. But even if you can't swim, you can still dip your toes. I have to write that on the wall. So hold. Now, even though my legs are low and I'm not really doing a handstand, I'm still getting a moment where all my weight is on my hands. Make sure you push. So if you notice that when you kick, your arms collapse like this, it's probably not a strength issue. It's probably because you're not used to holding yourself extended. This happens, so make sure you push and then try to keep that same structure of the handstand. So that's the next thing we're gonna do. We're gonna do multiple like that. So lean, but. And when I land the foot, what I don't want is this. See how my hips are low and my foot's really far away? I can't stand up like that. So when I land, I want to land directly underneath my hip. So when I transfer weight, it's very easy to stand up. Because when you do it fast, more extension, it becomes much easier to stand up. For now, don't worry about how extended your legs are. That comes later. Just get that smooth transition. Stand. Whoa. Weight in the hands. Switch. Switch. Stand up. And then just a couple more tips for landing. So this should make no noise. Shouldn't be any kind of thunder. If you have a thunder, it means you're not being particular enough with how you shift the weight. So most important thing with the thunder when you land is you never want to land with a straight leg. I mean, a handstand, it's not going to hurt you, but if you land like a jump with a straight leg, that's actually really bad. And you don't want to land with a flat foot. So you want the foot to roll because that's going to soften your landing, but also smooth out your transition. And you want the knee to bend. So like this. So if I land like this, there's a thud because there's one impact. But if I absorb that impact with my foot and my knee, it becomes quiet and smooth. And with the hands, it's kind of another detail. Even when I place my hands, I don't put them the whole hand at once. I actually roll through the fingers. But all of that combined with the understanding of your distance and your momentum. So we're doing it slow, but if you feel confident, you don't have to go all the way from standing, but you can give yourself a little bit more momentum. Lean. Whoa. My legs are still always in front of me. So I'm never right now at the point where I'm kicking my legs to a vertical handstand. I'm keeping them in front because it's safe, but as I get more confident, I can gradually go higher and I can get more extension. And I'm always pushing down into the floor. Again, you don't have to go that high. You go as high as you're comfortable with. Make it as smooth as possible. But you don't want to, like all of the conditioning and preparation, very important. But you don't want to wait too long. This is not just for handstands. You don't want to wait too long to do the actual skill because you put it on a pedestal. And if you're afraid of it, you're more likely to be more afraid of it because you're waiting too long to do it. Like, You're afraid of flying, you have to jump. That doesn't mean you jump off a cliff on day one. But if you don't spend time in the air, you're not going to know. So you can use that analogy of dry land swimming in a lot of things, but you want to do the actual skill with the potential for chaos and failure as soon as possible, but also as safely as possible. So you do have to still account for safety. Whew, I'm getting a cardio workout. So next thing, I'm going to briefly talk about kind of the chaos of bailouts, because the bailout is one of the things that holds a lot of students back from getting confident and balancing in the handstand, is because they're afraid of falling. Sometimes they haven't experienced a fall and they're afraid of the unknown. Sometimes they've experienced a bad fall and they don't want that to happen again. So it might take a little bit more time for some of you to learn. It might take a little bit more space. So I'm not going to go into it right now in crazy detail, but I just want to explain the process that you're going to want to take before you try to essentially balance and hold your handstand. This is, once you can bail out safely, there's no danger at all to the handstand, right? It's like a bird. Bird's not afraid of falling because the bird knows that they can fly. So if you know that no matter what, you can always land a handstand back on your feet, even if you lose control, then you're not really going to be afraid of it. And then you can free up a lot of mental capacity for more important things. So I don't think I have a wide enough angle for this. I'm going to see how wide I can go. The first step is cartwheel. I know it's not a handstand, but cartwheel is a really important display of how well you can control momentum. So if you want to learn to bail out of a handstand, you have to learn to cartwheel. I don't have a lot of space myself, so I'm just going to go through this quick, like that. So here's the cartwheel. Cartwheel is a fall. I'm falling forward, and the moment that I would have to take a step in order to not continue falling is when I put my hands down. And the way I start my cartwheel is I have one leg in front. It's not always the case, but typically if you're right hand dominant, you usually twist left. So it'll make sense later, maybe not. But anyway, if I'm right hand dominant, so I have my left leg in front. As I reach forward, I turn the hands like this. So it goes left, right. And I put the hands down, a little bit in front of my foot, and I kick the leg past the hands. So I want to travel forward. I fall forward and I kick the legs over. I don't want to get too deep into cartwheels because that could easily be a whole other couple-hour seminar. I have a lot of cartwheel material, but this idea of controlling momentum, being comfortable with landing, legs don't have to go high. Even if your legs just barely brush the floor, that's fine. And it's not a handstand, so I'm not actually trying to stay on the hands. It's like I just use the hands as a transition point to get back to the feet. If you're training inside and you have a confined space, just be safe, know your space, because I've kicked a lot of walls, I've kicked a lot of tables, so I don't have a lot of space where I'm at right now, so that's also one of the reasons why I'm more tucked. If you have more space, you're outside, you can practice extension. The point is, this is what the handstand bailout is going to look like, is a handstand, and then when I fall forward, and see, that's why the space is important, I hit the wall. So when I fall forward, I transfer into a cartwheel. So what happens is, and I'll go into a slower version of that as well, that you can take a little bit more deliberately, because when I'm teaching a class, I like to give people a bit of chaos, but online it's hard to predict, so I want you to be safe. So basically, I'm in my handstand, I'm looking between my hands. As my hips fall over and I feel like I'm out of control, what I do is continue looking at the floor. I take one step across with my hand, and then I kick that same leg down. So if I kick too far, I step the right hand, I kick the right leg down. I never lost sight
of the floor. Again, take your time with this. This is just a very quick progression, but basically you have to get comfortable with falling and with failing if you want to get comfortable with balancing. And the idea is you train it enough, it becomes a reflex. It becomes something that you don't think about. Like, oh, I fell, instant turn. Just like if I'm standing and you push me, I'm off balance, I'll take a step. So that's what the bailout should be, is eventually this kind of reflexive movement. And when you have that, you don't have to worry about falling because you know you can always land safely. And then the surface doesn't matter as long as you can land soft. And then that's when you can free yourself and focus on the technique. And again, I have a YouTube video on this that goes into the progressions a bit more in depth. So you can check that out because I do want to move on, go another 15 or 20 minutes because there's a couple more exercises that I wanted to cover. So hopefully that makes sense. And also, again, if you're an adult, just kind of, exploring your fitness journey, I think anyone should be able to do a cartwheel. Handstand or not, acrobat or not, it doesn't matter. Cartwheel is like one of those movements that we do as kids just for fun. And then we get grown up and then we don't care. Like, no, cartwheels. Grow up. No, don't grow up. You should do cartwheels. Because even from an athletic standpoint, there's a lot of things going on that can help you with a lot of other body awareness type things that can transfer into other sports. And it's just a way, again, as adults, sometimes we work a lot and we're serious all the time. So it's a way to not be so serious. So I have a content on cartwheels. I'm going to put out more eventually later because I love cartwheels. I love all of the variations and progressions. But bottom line is, if you want to learn a handstand, you should also learn how to do a cartwheel and use that to bail out of your handstand. So basically I have two and a half more exercises that I wanted to cover in this particular beginner workshop. So the next step is the wall handstand. The wall handstand is a very important progression because it allows you to get fully vertical, and it also allows you to accumulate time in the handstand to build strength, to build endurance, to build comfort, all this kind of stuff. So I'm going to see what kind of angle I can get. This is the first exercise, and we're going to do chest to wall handstand first, because it encourages better form, but also because there are half measures. You can step into it a little bit easier, but very important with all of the wall handstands is you've got gas in your tank, don't run out of gas. So you never do any of this to failure. Eventually you can test yourself, but when you're learning, nothing should be to failure, because you have to understand that it still takes energy to come out. And if you're in a handstand and your arms give out and then you try to come out and you fall on your head, it's not going to be a fun day. So make sure, you have a tank full of gas, make sure you have enough gas in it to get home. The other thing is, I've talked about this a little bit, but I have to repeat it, slow, controlled movements, nothing sudden. Everything should be slow and controlled, and you understand the pace and you're breathing the whole time. So first exercise, we're going to start in a push-up position. This is a really good strength builder as well. You're going to get your feet up on the wall. And you're going to slowly walk. Notice I'm shifting my hips a little bit side to side. I get as high as I can, and I just hang out there, hold, and keep the push. So I don't want to let myself collapse. And then I slowly come down, very controlled. And I know you can't see from this angle, but in this case, what I want is my hips on top of my hands, and then my legs a little bit tilted. What I don't want is the whole body tilted, because if you think about the wall, you don't want to build the dependence on the wall. The wall is a tool to build independence. So if I'm leaning against the wall and putting weight on it, you take the wall away, I fall. If I'm standing, but I'm just using the wall to help me with balance, if you take the wall away, I can still hold myself up. So I'll do this in a minute so you can see a sideways angle. But basically, you want to make your feet as light as possible at any given point, because the goal of the wall is to not have to use the wall. So you can go as high as you're comfortable with, and then you go a little bit higher. So if I'm more comfortable, okay, walk. I have my hips above my head. And go a little bit closer. And I hold. And I hold. And then I slowly come out with control. No speed, no ego. You're just getting higher and higher as you get more comfortable, as you get stronger. You get in there, you hold, you can set a timer if you want. You can count out loud if you want. Doing actually anything out loud, any kind of talking is really good when you're doing these wall handstands, because you're going to breathe better. When you talk and you're going to be a little bit distracted to the point that you'll find a way to do the exercise in a way that you're not consciously thinking about it, if that makes sense. It's okay, yeah, you have to have conscious thought. You're in the handstand, you think, okay, I have to push, I have to breathe, but it's better if you do that automatically. So a lot of times, like if with a training partner, just having a conversation with them, that distraction can actually help your body figure out a way to do the skill that becomes less conscious and more automatic, which is what you want, especially when we're building progressions. Because you balance the handstand, you don't want to have to focus on the structure, on the push, right? Then with the next step, you learn to move your legs in the handstand. You don't want to have to consciously focus on the balance because you're adding these layers of complexity. So we're going to do one more of these, and I'm going to show you how to also practice the bailout. So I'm going to go a little bit higher. Right? Walk with control. If I want to challenge myself, I can do longer holds on one arm. Notice I'm shifting my hips. If I don't shift my hips, it's very difficult to take the step. So that shift is very important to have a smooth walk. Make sure you're pushing. Make sure your arms are shoulder width. So it's a very heavy walk like this. It's a very heavy walk like this. So arms narrow. Get a little bit closer now. A little bit closer. And I'm going to do the bailout very slowly. So I'm going to shift the weight into my left hand, step the right, and then kick at a slight angle away from the wall. So this allows me, right, and get up a little bit faster to show you, step like this. So with a bit of control, I can practice stepping the hand and then kicking the leg down, and that's a way to do the bailout in a more controlled manner. It's still not going to build the reflex until you really do it and you really let yourself fall and you have that oh shit moment and you react. But it's still a way to get reps in to kind of groove that movement pattern. So when you build the actual reflexive pattern of the bailout, it's more likely to be there. So we're going to also do the back to the wall handstand. And I'm going to do both of these and I'll explain some of the differences. And then I'll show you a sideways angle so you can get a little bit better understanding of the technique. So back to wall handstand.
Sorry to interrupt, but your camera has gone blurry.
What?
Oh, now it's back.
Yeah, sorry, autofocus. Thanks. Yep, it's hard when you're on camera, man. I think it has an okay autofocus. All right, so yeah, thanks for that. So we're gonna put the hands and the distance between the wall and the hands. You don't want to be completely flush. You want to have a little bit of space, maybe about 2-3 inches between the fingertips and the wall. And it's the same idea as we did when we did the kick-ups, is I put the weight into the hands and I kick and I just see how far I can go. Because I don't want to put in so much power that I put a hole in the wall or bruise my heel. I want it to be technical to a point that I can arrive in the handstand where I need to be without using any excess effort. So what I'm going to do is put the hands down, shift the weight, kick. Okay, I didn't find the wall.
little bit higher. Okay. And I'm finding the wall with my heel, but I haven't touched it yet. So I keep kicking a little bit higher. Okay, I found it. So then that's how much kick I use. So then here, only my heels touch the wall. I push with my shoulders, keep breathing. I'm looking at the camera, but really you should be looking at the floor when you practice these, because it will give you a better idea of balance. And again, just hold, just get comfortable, and then come down to kick. So when you do these back to wall handstands, it's not a full blast. It's taken in steps. Put your hands down, you put weight in the hands, and you gradually kick higher and higher until you know where the wall is. Then when you know where the wall is, you know exactly how much to kick that you find the wall. And the analogy I like to use, and something I use more in the freestanding kick to handstand, but it still applies, is I'm driving in my car and whatever, I'm about to pull up to a traffic light, and I notice the traffic light turned yellow and then red, but I have some momentum. Do I want to accelerate to the light and then hit the brake? I don't, because that uses more gas. I want to go in neutral, I want to coast. So it's like this idea of when I kick to the handstand, I want to give it just enough momentum that it stops exactly where I want it to be. And I don't have to use the gas, I don't have to use the brake, it just gets me there. That's a technical thing that takes a lot of practice, but you want it to be gentle, you don't want to force it. And the handstand itself, just like before, you don't want to lean your weight into the wall. You want to make the feet as light as possible. And before getting into any balance work, which is not going to be covered in this workshop, you want to get comfortable. Comfortable in a handstand. So comfortable upside down. It's not only measured by time. Time is a good indicator of it. So if you can do 60 seconds, that's good. If you can do 60 seconds once, it's okay, but what we're really looking for is what you can repeat. So if you can do 60 seconds, rest a little bit, let's say you rest 2 minutes, do another 60 seconds, you can repeat that. That means a lot more than just doing it once as a maximum. But it's not just the time. I want you to be comfortable, so I don't want you to be stressed out. I want the breathing to flow. If I'm coaching someone and I give them a correction, they should be able to take that correction. Right? These are all the details that aren't covered in just holding 60 seconds. But you want to get as comfortable as possible. It just takes time. Just get into a handstand, stay there, come down, do it again. And then when you get comfortable enough, then you start to add that further complexity. So I'm going to try to get a side profile of both of these exercises, or close enough. I know the lighting is not ideal, but it should be hopefully enough. Yeah, I think that'll be good. So same 2 exercises, just a little bit of different camera angles so you can see what's happening. Notice I haven't given a lot of alignment cues in the handstand. The most important thing, honestly, is just to get comfortable and to push upwards with the shoulders to keep that push in the floor. And then when you get comfortable with that, then you can get into these details like chest in and posterior pelvic tilt and all of this. Again, it's different if I were teaching like a child gymnast for a competitive reason, because then I would want to make sure to build the form right away. But with adults, it's like macro versus micro, right? Let's say if I want to draw a horse, for someone to learn to draw the rough shape of a horse before I get into the hairs and the tail and the eyes and all of this stuff. So macro is just learn to hold yourself up, learn to be comfortable holding yourself up. And then micro is the, okay, I'm going to adjust the shoulder angle. I'm going to pull the chest in. And again, this isn't right or wrong. This is depending on your goals, right? So let me talk a little bit more about the cat is about to headbutt the tripod. That's why I went silent. So I'm gonna keep my hands, or keep my shoulders on top of my hands the whole time. I slowly walk. Maybe I'm here, that's okay, I spend time.
Closer is good if I can get within a couple inches. And then this is how I'm going to be really strict with the chest to wall handstand form. So feet together, and I'm pulling my sternum towards the wall. Not even just the sternum, but the upper chest, and see how that opens my shoulders. And that's the position. And I'm still looking at the floor between my hands. And then I slowly come down. If I want to work the bailout, I step to the side and I get away from the wall.
And actually exiting like this, where you get away from the wall, is also really important. If you have a wall with potential hazards, like nails poking out of it, you don't want to brush the wall as you come out. You just want to get away from it. So one more time. Oh, slow, controlled, push with the arms. I get close. I try to take the upper chest to the wall, feet together, hips to the wall. This is generally the kind of gymnastics form or the circus hand balancing form. And then if I want to work the bailout, I take one step across. It gives me space to kick my leg down. So when I say the upper chest to the wall, get within a couple inches, and then right here, space between my collarbones. Because sometimes the chest to the wall cue isn't necessarily a good one, because I might lean and arch. Was some other cues that I've heard. Nose to the wall, I don't like that either, because you don't want to look away from the floor. That's going to teach you different habits. You want to see the floor because that's going to help with your bailouts, with your proprioception. So the way my preference is upper chest, space between the collarbones, doesn't have to touch. Doesn't matter if it touches or not. This idea of pulling it, it hits the shoulders and the upper back at the same time, and then hips and feet touching the wall. If you don't want to get picky with all of that, then only feet touching the wall like this is fine. Once you get higher, I don't know if they're in frame. When I walk up the wall, I have my toes touching. When I get up to a point that I'm in more or less of a handstand, I point the feet and I put the tops of the feet on the wall, because I'm more likely to lean or less likely to lean weight into the feet like that, which makes it more likely that I'm holding more of my own weight. And then the final exercise, back to wall handstand. We'll do a quick recap, and then we'll do a couple question and answer. So check the frame. I put my hands down about 2-3 inches from the tips of the fingers to the wall. I put the weight into the hands. I slowly kick a little bit higher each time. I'm searching for the wall with my heel. I found it. Same amount of power, land gently, only the heels touch the wall. Push with the shoulders, look between the hands. Stay, hang out, enjoy, breathe. And then come down with control. So, quick recap, and then I'm going to end the recording, and then I'll take a few questions. So, warm up. We did some wrist and shoulder movements. Very important, most important shoulder mobility for this one is the overhead and shoulder flexion. If you can't lift your arms above your head and you're like this, maybe you don't need to think about doing handstands yet. Maybe you need to address your shoulders issues first. If you can get your arms above your head, you can continue to improve your shoulder mobility. More flexibility is good to a point. Hypermobility can also be its own drawback for other reasons. So I don't want to get too deep into that, but generally you want 180 degrees or at least close to that with your arms and your back. And you want the arms to be shoulder width. Wrists are very important, so you can move them around. You can put a bit of weight into them. Go slow. Get used to putting weight into the hands. Feel what you need to do with your shoulders in order to hold yourself up. The general idea is push against gravity. So gravity is pulling me this way, I push this way. Gravity is pulling me this way if I did nothing. So I push this way. You don't have to be maximally pushed out, but if you are new and you haven't taken that cue before, it's better to think about maximally pushing out because the manifestation may not be what you think it is. Get used to being upside down. Headstand is a good way to start. Doing headstands will not get you your headstands or your handstand, sorry. So if you get really good at headstands and then you wonder why your handstand is wobbly, it's because you're not building a specific adaptation. So headstand is good for building control upside down, but if you want to do a handstand, you have to practice handstands, practice your kick-ups without the wall, keep your legs low, but get comfortable with it. Go as slow as you need to, build up the time under tension, build up the strength, but also start to understand momentum and how to control it. Learn the cartwheel. Start with your wall handstands, build up slowly, spend time, and then how long is it going to take? I don't know, depending on the person. It might take a couple weeks if someone's in really good shape and very confident, just getting over the fear and over the skill. Might take a few months because maybe somebody has to slowly build up the strength and the resilience, and that's okay too. It'll take you as long as it takes you. Don't look for the quick fix because all of these 30-day to handstand courses, those are marketing ploys. It's possible to learn a handstand in 30 days, but that doesn't mean you will. And it's more likely that you won't because it generally always takes longer than what you think, and 30 days is a very small time frame. It took me about a year and a half to learn how to balance a handstand pretty steady. Now, I could have done that in probably 6 months if I knew what I was doing, right? But yeah, don't get discouraged. It's going to take you as long as it takes you. Enjoy the process, have fun. You're going to have good days, you're going to have bad days. Consistency is important. I don't want to throw out all these fitness cliches. So what I'm going to do is end the class. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned a couple good tips from it, even if it's just shoulder warm up. Or if you, I always say in a class, I'm trying to give out a lot of information. I don't expect people to absorb all of it. So if you take a class and you learn one thing, then that's a victory. Because you learned one thing that you didn't know before. And if that one thing can challenge or change your perspective on something, if it can open up new perspectives, that's huge because now you've permanently changed how you look at that thing. So anyway, yeah, if you learned one thing today, I'm happy. If you learn more than one thing, even better. So I'm going to end the recording. And yeah, I actually have to plug my materials because I'm giving so much away for free. So if you enjoyed the class and you want to help me out financially, I always appreciate that because then I can pay bills and I can eat food, and that's always helpful. So I have some courses that I sell. If you go to joinreps.com, these are videos from a live handstand course that I taught. I have an ebook called Balancing the Equation. I have a couple other ebooks. I have a Vimeo on demand channel where I have long form tutorials. So if you enjoy the class and you want to help support me financially, these are options to do that. If you just want to, I don't have a tip hat, but if you want to throw me money on PayPal too, that's cool, but you don't have to because I don't want the information to be behind a paywall. I want to be able to deliver good information without any of this marketing BS. So I hope that I was able to do that. And I will be offering some online class and one-on-one coaching options very soon. So look out for that. But other than that, yeah, I hope you enjoyed the class. And I hope you learned one thing and got something out of it. So I'm going to end the recording now. Where is the button? Stop cloud. Yes.